Once upon a time in the small, fog-draped town of Blackwood Hollow, where crooked trees bent under the weight of mist and every street seemed like a secret corridor leading into shadows, there was a legend whispered across generations, a tale about an entity known only as the Spirit of Fear. No one had seen it and lived to describe its form clearly, but everyone who believed claimed that it did not appear like a creature of flesh and bone. Instead, it was the shape of terror itself, taking on whatever image a victim most dreaded. For decades, stories had been told about miners who went too deep in the abandoned shafts and heard their dead relatives calling them, or children who swore their mothers were waiting at the end of the forest trail only to vanish when they reached out. The most terrifying part of the myth was not how it killed, but how it consumed. The spirit of fear devoured courage, sanity, and hope until its prey surrendered willingly to the dark. Evelyn Marlowe, a 27-year-old historian with an insatiable curiosity, returned to Blackwood Hollow after her father's death, inheriting his creaky Victorian-style house that stood at the edge of the town near the thick woods where most of the legends were rooted. She had grown up listening to her father's warnings about never wandering beyond the iron fence at dusk, but as a woman now hardened by life's disappointments and the sorrow of losing her only family, Evelyn wasn't afraid of tales. She was desperate for truth. The locals, however, were unsettled by her return, whispering as she passed by the bakery or library, muttering that no good ever came from stirring the past. A week after settling in, she found in her father's attic a set of old journals, his handwriting frantic and uneven, documenting encounters with shadows that slithered across his bedroom walls, voices that hissed his name, and nights where he awoke paralyzed, drenched in sweat, certain that something had been standing at the foot of his bed. The last page ended mid-sentence. "It's here. It wears her face." And then nothing. Evelyn felt a strange chill gripping her chest, but her rational mind told her grief must have driven him into delusion. Still, when night came, she found it hard to sleep, and when she finally closed her eyes, she dreamed of her mother who had died when Evelyn was just a child. Only this time her mother's smile was too wide, her eyes too hollow, and when she reached out, Evelyn woke to find scratch marks down the wooden floor beside her bed. From that night forward, the house grew heavier with silence. The ticking of the clock sounded like a hammer striking stone. The groan of the wind rattling windows seemed almost like whispers, and shadows no longer obeyed the furniture, but shifted, as though alive. Evelyn tried to dismiss it, yet she couldn't ignore how the shadows grew darker and colder each evening. Determined to find answers, she visited the town archives and discovered that Blackwood Hollow was built on the remains of a settlement that had mysteriously vanished in the 1700s. A diary from that era described a curse summoned by a group desperate for protection during a famine. They had called upon something older than gods, binding fear itself into a spirit that would punish outsiders. The summoners believed they could control it, but within months the entire settlement disappeared, leaving only ruins buried beneath the forest soil. Evelyn realized with a chill that her family home was built right on the edge of where that settlement once stood. Each night became more unbearable. Sometimes she heard her father calling her name from the basement, though she had buried him weeks ago. Other times she saw her reflection in the mirror smile at her before she had even moved her lips. She tried to record the events with her phone, but every time she played back the footage, it was corrupted by static, except for one chilling message whispered through. "You already belong to me." Fear began to settle into her bones, but she refused to leave, driven by an obsession to uncover what had consumed her father. On the 13th night, she lit candles and sat in the living room with the journal open, daring the spirit to show itself. The temperature plummeted, frost formed on the windows, and from the corners of the room emerged shapes. First her mother, then her father, then countless others she had lost, all of them smiling, all of them whispering for her to give in. Evelyn clutched the journal, repeating words she had found in the old settlement's diary, an incantation meant to bind the spirit back into slumber. But as she spoke, the forms grew clearer, and one stepped closer, her own mirror image, pale, with hollow eyes and a bleeding grin. "You cannot bind what you are," it hissed, "for you are me." At that moment, Evelyn realized the horrific truth. The spirit of fear was not some external monster. It was born inside the people of Blackwood Hollow, passed down like a curse, feeding on their deepest terrors until it hollowed them out and wore them like skin. Her father hadn't been warning her of something outside. He had been warning her of herself. The entity lunged, shadows flooding her mouth, nose, and ears, until she screamed, but no sound came, only darkness pouring out of her lungs. The candles extinguished, and silence fell. Days later, neighbors noticed the Marlowe house quiet again. No lights at night, no movement. When the sheriff forced the door open, he found Evelyn sitting at the desk, the journal open, her eyes wide and unblinking, lips curled into a smile too sharp to be human. She whispered to him, "Do you remember your fear?" Before the lights went out and the sheriff's scream was the last thing heard. From that night on, Blackwood Hollow had a new whisper in its legends. Evelyn Marlowe had not died. She had become the newest face of the spirit of fear, and whoever dared to walk into her home never returned. The legend of Evelyn Marlowe spread quickly through Blackwood Hollow, whispered first as gossip by frightened neighbors and then cemented into a tale parents used to keep their children inside after dark. But the spirit of fear does not confine itself to stories alone. It is patient, lingering in silence, waiting for the next trembling heart to cross its path. Weeks after Evelyn's disappearance, travelers passing through the town began reporting strange encounters. A truck driver swore that as he drove past the Marlowe house at midnight, he saw a woman standing in the upstairs window, her face pressed against the glass, but when he blinked, the figure was standing in the middle of the road, smiling, forcing him to swerve and crash into a ditch. He survived, but his hair turned gray overnight, and when doctors questioned him later, all he could whisper was, "She showed me my worst memory." A group of teenagers, daring each other to film the house for their social media channel, vanished completely. Their phones were found days later stacked neatly on the Marlowe doorstep, each one containing videos of their own terrified faces screaming at something off camera, begging unseen hands to let them out. The sheriff who had once heard Evelyn's whisper was found wandering the woods barefoot, muttering about how the trees had eyes. Blackwood Hollow began to rot from the inside out, businesses shuttering, families fleeing, leaving only the desperate and the stubborn behind. The few who remained began to notice that fear itself had thickened the air. Arguments turned violent without cause, dreams twisted into nightmares that followed people into waking hours, and even animals refused to cross certain roads, howling as if warning of invisible predators. Meanwhile, Evelyn, or what she had become, moved freely through her family home, her body a shell animated by something ancient, her eyes now mirrors of every soul she encountered. She could take the form of whatever her victim most feared: a lost child's dead parent, a soldier's fallen comrade, a mother's drowned baby, each image sharper and more merciless than the last. The spirit did not kill for hunger. It killed for possession, spreading like a plague that thrived on terror. As months passed, Blackwood Hollow became a ghost town, but the curse did not remain trapped within its borders. One by one, visitors carried fragments of the spirit beyond, returning home with stories of shadows following them, of mirrors no longer showing their reflections, of voices whispering their names from the corners of empty rooms. It spread like a disease without cure, moving across cities in whispers and screams, until researchers, priests, and skeptics alike were drawn to investigate. A small team of paranormal investigators arrived, convinced they could prove the existence of the spirit and contain it with their equipment. They set up cameras, EMF readers, and protective circles, but the spirit mocked their rituals. Their devices recorded nothing but static until suddenly the screen showed each investigator's worst fear. One man saw his daughter drowning, another saw his body burning alive, and the leader saw himself suffocating, his throat filling with shadow. Hours later, all their equipment was found abandoned, and their van was discovered miles away with claw marks inside the glass. The spirit had grown stronger with every frightened mind it devoured, and Evelyn's body, though long dead, still walked as its vessel, a reminder that fear itself was endless, boundless, unkillable. Those who tried to write about it, to publish the truth, mysteriously lost their voices or typed only in black pages, ink bleeding into void. The spirit silenced anyone who sought to warn others, feeding on their despair. And yet, deep within her house in Blackwood Hollow, Evelyn's journal still sat on the desk, open to a blank page, the pen hovering as if an invisible hand waited for the next entry. Some say if you dare to read aloud the last words written by her father, and then Evelyn herself, the spirit will cross into your home, staring at you from the corner of your eye, smiling with your own face until you cannot tell where you end and it begins. The spirit of fear had no end, no beginning. It was not a ghost to banish, nor a demon to fight. It was the truth that fear itself was the oldest predator, and humanity had been feeding it since the first shadow ever fell across a cave wall.